Hi, I'm Tim Reiki, and welcome to Nassau Bay Television. This morning we are in the home of Vince Privitera, and we're going to go ahead and speak with him about acting and directing and writing. Vince, let me ask you a question. How did you get excited about acting and directing and writing?
Well, if I go back to the starting point, I would have to mention my father first taking me to a movie after my mother died. I was not allowed to. I was 7 years old and not allowed to go to any movies or any functions for a year. And finally, at the age of 7.5 or so, he took me to the local theater in Buffalo, New York, the old Ellen Terry, and we saw, they used to show like 2 features and the news and 2 comedies and cartoons, and they showed the Three Stooges, and I guess I got into uncontrollable laughter. My dad was sort of embarrassed, but that introduction to what film could really do, and that I was partaking in it, whether I liked it or not, I think got me started in interest. And of course it quickly faded because it didn't seem like any of that would ever be accessible in any way. So I went on to college and at Columbia University studied, got a BS degree, studied physical therapy. And my first job was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and polio epidemic, by the way.
Okay.
And it was at that time that I saw such movies as On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando and From Here to Eternity. These specifically come back. Before that had been the neo-realism of Italian movies, Bicycle Thief and Open City and La Strada, films by Fellini. And I really got excited about that whole thing of directing and acting, and went back to New York City to study dramatics then and directing, and for about a year, and then met my wife, Marilyn, who was an occupational therapist. And then it was forgotten again, and we moved out to where were we first? Oh, Amarillo. And then finally got a wild hair about going to medical school, so then we came down to Galveston, finished medical school. But within that period, I was still writing short things, mostly short plays, none of which, of course, did anything. And finally, during my practice here in Nassau Bay, we moved here in '71, and I wrote a play, I directed a play called Prisoner of Second Avenue at the old Rose Theater, Clear Creek Country Theater, beautiful theater, an old movie theater. And I started directing things, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Tennessee Williams things, Streetcar Named Desire, and then started writing more, and then wrote a few plays, some of which were, well, 2 or 3 which were put on, and then some readings, one of which you partook.
Yes.
And the ball started rolling, and then I befriended someone who was a local film producer, and I told him I had written a script called A Sonnet for the Hunter, and he said, "Let me read it, and I'm going to meet Shelley Lewis tomorrow night, and we'll see what it's like." So he read it, he showed it to her, she liked it, and then he came back and said she wants to do it. Well, then the question was, where are you going to get the money?
Mm-hmm.
And we did get $15,000 units from people. And she wanted to do the film, and the title was changed finally to Witchfire. And so I said to Jim, the producer, who are you going to get to direct it? And he said, we can't afford anybody, so you. So because he knew that I directed little theater and I was teaching acting,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, you know, I've never directed a movie before. And he said, well, we'll get some guy from Hollywood to come out as assistant director, and
Mm-hmm.
you can just work with the actors, and he can do all the other work. And so we did it that way, sort of. So I got that job, which wasn't a job, which was only because they couldn't afford a director. So that's how the thing started moving. And then I became more intrigued with movie making
Mm-hmm.
than theater, for a lot of reasons. But if someone asked me, well, which reasons, particularly, it would be the realization that the visual, the narrative paled next to the visual.
Mm.
That with a close-up, with a face, you could do so much more than you could do with a written word. And I got a master's in film.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole other story, but the final 6 hours of that work was in independent studies and application of psychology to the teaching of acting, and then script writing. Before they had studied technique and things.
Cool.
Okay, Vince, let me get this straight. You were still in your practice with psychiatry when Witchfire occurred.
Yes, it was in 1984 actually, and the film was released in 85, just before 86.
Okay.
And it was in the market at the Cannes Film Festival, not in the competition, but in
Mm-hmm.
the market. But I was in practice at that time in 84 and took off at great expense, took off 6 weeks
Mm-hmm.
of work. And we shot the film in 19 days, but it occurred while I was in practice, and so I had to get back to work.
Now, I know that you've also gone ahead and kind of delved into, you're doing some acting classes as well, now through a couple.
I'm trying to. It's sort of difficult to get people together, and now that the Arts Alliance Center is closed, we don't have that venue.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I continue to try to,
Okay.
and I enjoy teaching acting very much. So I hope I can.
Okay.
I hope I'm able to.
Vince, if I could just go back just a little bit, you mentioned that if you were faced with the question of whether go with talent or special face, that you would have to go ahead and think about that. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Okay, yeah, that may be not quite the way to put it in some sense, because I do appreciate talent very, very much, and but the sense in which I was speaking was concerning how much the face could convey an emotion. Since the face, if you want to show an emotion in a movie, to me, you have to show a face. Now, Fellini once said that he was auditioning for a tall, thin man with glasses for a particular part.
Mm-hmm.
But then he saw a short man with a mustache, no glasses, and a balding head. And he looked at that face and he said, that says so much. So he rewrote it.
Mm-hmm.
He rewrote the part to fit the character.
Okay.
And that's what I'm really talking about.
Okay, Vince, you touched on a recent film with a local actress. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you've done lately, what other films you've done, and what other films you've got planned? Anything on the slate now?
Well, the first thing we did several years ago was called Coming Alive. That was a docudrama about Edgar Lee Masters' work in Spoon River Anthology. So it wasn't really a dramatic film. It was a docudrama. Then, let's see, I did a short film called Keep in Touch, about a 14-minute film, which had to do with how people avoid intimacy by electronics, emails, and that was before texting. So now it's even worse. Now it's worse. I can really avoid you now. I can just text you and tweet and email you. Never talk on the phone though. I can avoid that. And this was simply about a couple that broke up, and then he writes poetry to her, and he sends her things on his camera phone. She agrees to meet again, but he can't talk. And he starts to show her the poem, and she says, well, things haven't changed really. Goodbye. Keep in touch. And that's what that was about. And then we did one with Zach Tate called A Raven at the Window, the one in which you took part in the reading. And that turned out to be about a 16 to 20 minute film. And then I did one called Lady in the Funhouse Mirror, which had to do with a housewife who slowly became psychotic. And then did one called The Empty Chair. That was from a play I'd written called A Way of Deliverance. And that turned out okay. You know how it is. No budget, coffee, donuts, pizza, gas money. A lot of help with editors. You can't do it alone. You can't even come close to doing it alone.
Right.
So you depend on friends and other talented people, and you better give them credit, because that's where the credit's due. You may come up with an idea, but you can't do anything without that.
Right. Well, that's the thing with film. Everybody doesn't realize, even especially with short film, how much effort and how much work goes into even a very short film.
I really believe that the hardest work I ever did, really, was make Witchfire with Shelley Lewis. We shot that in 19 days. 5 in the morning to midnight. Just night and day effort. Lost 15 pounds. I don't know how I've ever worked harder than that. A medical school wasn't that hard.
So, what is your current project that you're working on today, Vince?
Well, I'm just finishing the script. You know what finishing means. You're not really finishing. But it's the first, and I hate to use a word, whatever, the draft. But the concept is that of a young 35-year-old housewife who has an affair with a teenage boy, 19, 20, 21 maybe even, and how the boy has been trained by his mother to be severely narcissistic, to think that way, to think of entitlement and his full entitlement. And on the other hand, this young wife to be lectured to daily by her holier-than-thou husband. Somehow they come together, and then it becomes dangerous. And I won't say what the ending is, but it's much more dangerous than the fun part of the beginning, if you can call it fun. But we need about 4 characters, 4 or 5 dependable characters.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I would call it definitely a drama,
Mm-hmm.
and not any kind of a mystery. And it's sort of a tragedy, I mean, it's a tragic ending.
Mm-hmm.
I had my friends say, "Why don't you write something funny?" I don't know how to do that, maybe.
We all have our expertises. I wanted to thank you today, Vince, and thank you and your lovely wife, Marilyn, for allowing us into your home.
My God, you're welcome. Yes, always.
It's been a pleasure, and
It's been an honor for me. Thanks.
well, thank you very much. And again, this is Vince Privitera, and this is Tim Healy from Nassau Bay Television.